Relying on one thing as a so-called trigger is not the way to go. There needs to be certainty in the bill so that people know when they can legalize and then when the pathway to citizenship, earned citizenship, would open up.
I don't expect that the transition that will take place at the department will, when it comes to enforcing immigration laws, will become entangled in the politics over legislation that has broad bipartisan support.
When did the president find out that Secretary Napolitano was going to be leaving, and did he make the case that she should stay through the remainder of the
I don't have specific. I mean, obviously, the Secretary advised the President of her intentions, but I don't have a date for that. I can tell you the President believes Secretary Napolitano has done an excellent job.
But ideally, what you have now is a situation opening where you could have somebody in the position who was more less of an antagonist, less of an opposition force for Republicans who want to make the case, let's go forward with more border security.
Well, on that point, Senator Jeff Sessions, an opponent of immigration reform as it's been laid out so far, said this: the most significant obstacle to immigration reform remains President Obama's selective enforcement of the law. Any selection, interim or permanent, to replace Secretary Napolitano must disavow these aggressive non-enforcement directives, where there is very little hope for successful immigration reform. Charles.
Which is exactly why I think her leaving will have no effect whatsoever on the immigration debate, because it all came from above from Obama. I say that in the same spirit of charity that Jonah has evoked, but she was an able and eager collaborator in that, particularly in downplaying the war on terror, which is particularly ironic and hypocritical, given the fact that Obama at the same time was running this immense spying operation, which is supposed to be because of the threat of terror. So here she was in the first year or two or three discounting it in language and in action. But then again, there was the idea, as you showed in that clip, that what's important in immigration reform is the certainty of legalization and of citizenship, but the enforcement is a contingency that is not important. And the last item is the one you mentioned from Sessions, which he speaks about the selective enforcement. It was Obama who decided, but she was the one who enacted essentially an unconstitutional executive passing of the DREAM Act after the Congress had rejected it. It did it unilaterally by executive action, which is incredibly lawless. And she pretended it was simply an exercise of her discretion in allocating her limited funds. So she was a symbol of a policy, but no matter who's there, in the next instance, it's Obama who runs the policy.
Think about both from the man-caused and non-man-caused incidents, but particularly on the man-caused. The weapon of mass destruction involving a hazardous chemical or biological weapon is very high up on the scenarios that we are seeing.
You know, under her tenure, we've had no attacks. We've been safe as Americans.
Fort Hood.
I mean, she has managed this, to me, very well. But you'd have to say, if you look back on her record, I think she did a pretty good job.
Her record was the underwear didn't explode.
On the issue of reporters' guidelines and what the Department of Justice came out with today. These revised guidelines will help ensure the proper balance is struck when pursuing investigations into unauthorized disclosures. While these reforms will make a meaningful difference, there are additional protections that only Congress can provide. For that reason, we continue to support the passage of media shield legislation. He put out this statement: the guidelines appear to be welcome steps. That said, the Attorney General, Justice Department officials, and the FBI should also take full responsibility for the illegal actions taken against Fox News and James Rosen.
I think they are a marked improvement because they shift the burden of proof from the defendant, as it were, the journalist, to the government. So the default position is that you don't issue a subpoena, that you don't receive a search warrant unless you prove certain stringent conditions. That's good. But the whole idea of that thing was as a way to paper over what really happened in the past, the abuse of power, and I would say the lying about it, either to a judge or to Congress. They are talking about changes in guidelines. But it doesn't erase the fact that they have to answer for what was done, which I think was illegal.
Your vote, IRS funding, and the cutting of IRS funding. After all the IRS has been through, still under investigation. What about it?
All of that is right, but this is the wrong answer. cutting the budget is silly and small. This is a moment where you seize on the outrage of the public and you institute tax reform, which among other closing loopholes, etc. And if you eliminate all the complexities, you weaken the arbitrary power of the bureaucrats in the IRS. That's the ultimate revenge. It's the ultimately good policy.
This has been a Sunfish production.